In a city built on secrets, Amara Chima was the one thing no one noticed. A waitress at the Grand Selim. A ghost in a black and white uniform. But one wrong turn into the executive lounge changed everything. She saw the Crimson Ledger, the one secret that can topple an empire. Now, the most feared man in the city, Tae-Jin Kang, has a problem. He can't kill her because she's seen too much. And he can't let her go because his enemies are already at the door. He marked her to hide her. He trapped her to save her. But as the cleaners close in, they're about to realize that this waitress knows the hotel's shadows better than anyone. The hunt is on. And in this game of kings, the invisible girl just became the only move that matters. The air inside the Grand Selim always smelled of polished marble, expensive perfume, and floor wax that never fully dried. It was a space where silence wasn't empty, it was maintained. Owned. Amara Chima moved through the gold-leafed corridors like a ghost in a black and white uniform. She had learned early that in a city built on secrets, visibility was a death sentence. She mastered the art of the lowered gaze and the soft step, ensuring she remained part of the furniture. But tonight, the atmosphere had thickened. The lights felt too white, the reflections on the obsidian floors too sharp. Sent to the private executive lounge to retrieve a VIP tray, Amara pushed her cart into a silence that didn't belong to an empty room. It belonged to a room that had been emptied on purpose. That was when she saw it. A black, matte briefcase sat alone on a glass table. It didn't look valuable. It looked protected. A flickering overhead light caught a metallic emblem embedded in the surface. A crimson-black cipher shaped like dried blood. Amara stopped. Her breath slowed, not from calm, but from instinct. Her body recognized danger before her mind could name it. She made the mistake of looking closer. In the shadowed reflection of the lounge's glass wall, a man stood. Tae-Jin Kang. He didn't move. He wore a long black coat that seemed to absorb the room's light rather than reflect it. His presence didn't announce itself. It erased everything else. For a heartbeat, their eyes met in the glass. It wasn't a look, it was a verdict. Amara stepped back, her hand brushing the table as if she could undo the last 10 seconds. The smell of polished wood turned sharp, metallic. When she turned, Tae-Jin was no longer a reflection. He was in the room. He was close enough that the air between them felt physically displaced. He looked at the briefcase, then at her. Not with curiosity, but with quiet confirmation. I was just, Amara began, her voice collapsing under the weight of his stare. Tae-Jin didn't let her finish. You saw it, he said. His voice was a calm tide, cold and absolute. In that moment, the life Amara knew, the shifts, the tips, the safety of being unnoticed, vanished. She looked at the man who did not forget what he saw and realized she was no longer a ghost. She was a witness. The hotel lights dimmed, synchronized with the heavy thud of the lounge doors locking from the outside. The system had recognized her. From this breath, Tae-Jin murmured, stepping into her space. You are the only move that matters. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt structured, like the room had rearranged itself around Tae-Jin Kang's voice and decided nothing else was allowed to move freely anymore. Amara stood frozen as the weight of his gaze settled on her like something physical, not touching her skin but pressing into her awareness, into her breath, into the small space between her thoughts. The air in the room felt colder now, sharper, as if the hotel itself had recognized him and chosen obedience over comfort. She could hear nothing but the faint hum of the ceiling lights and the distant mechanical pulse of ventilation that suddenly sounded too loud, too alive. Tae-Jin Kang did not approach her immediately. He simply observed, still as a sealed storm, his black coat absorbing every fragment of light in the room, making him look less like a man and more like a decision that had already been made. Amara forced herself to breathe, but each breath felt measured, controlled by something other than her own will. You saw what you were not meant to see, he said again, softer this time, but not gentler, and that distinction mattered because softness from men like him was never safety. It was preparation. Amara tried to steady her voice. but it came out uneven. "I don't know what that was," she said. And even as she spoke, she realized how useless truth sounded in rooms like this. Tae-Jin tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in assessment, like he was measuring the distance between her fear and her honesty. Then he took a step, slow, deliberate, and the space between them changed instantly, not physically shrinking but emotionally collapsing, as if the room had decided she was no longer allowed distance. Somewhere far beyond the glass walls, movement flickered, shadows passing in disciplined silence. Men she had not noticed before now existed where there had been none. Amara felt it before she saw it. The hotel was no longer just a hotel. It had become something monitored, something occupied. Tae-Jin's presence explained everything without words. He stopped a few steps away from her, close enough that she could feel the controlled heat of his stillness. "From this moment," he said quietly, "you do not leave my sight." The sentence did not sound like protection. It sounded like containment. Amara's heartbeat rose, not in panic alone, but in the terrifying realization that no door in the room felt like escape anymore. Even the exits she knew suddenly seemed uncertain, unfamiliar, as if the building itself had shifted its layout while she wasn't looking. Tae-Jin turned his gaze briefly toward the corridor outside the lounge, and at that exact moment, Amara noticed something wrong. Two hotel staff members who should have been cleaning the hallway were standing too still, too perfectly positioned, not working, watching. She swallowed hard. The air felt thinner now, as if the hotel was slowly withdrawing oxygen from anyone not aligned with him. Tae-Jin looked back at her, his expression unchanged, but something darker lingered beneath his calm, not emotion, but ownership of outcome. "You will forget what you think you saw," he said, "or you will learn why forgetting is not always an option." Amara's fingers tightened against her palm, nails pressing into skin, grounding herself in pain because it was the only thing that felt real. But even that felt distant, muted, like the room was swallowing sensation. Tae-Jin finally stepped slightly aside, not releasing her, but repositioning her within his control of the space. And as he did, Amara noticed the briefcase again, still on the table, still untouched, but now it felt louder than before, like it was breathing without sound, carrying whatever truth she had accidentally stepped into. And in that moment she understood something she could not yet explain. She was not in danger because she had seen something. She was in danger because she had been seen seeing it, and Tae-Jin Kang had already decided she was part of the Crimson Empire's problem. If you have watched up till now, you know the story is interesting, but what you will watch next is much more intriguing. But before then, kindly subscribe to this channel as we bring you the most intriguing Afro-Korean mafia love stories. Hit the notification bell to get a notification of a new story. Also tap the like button and drop a comment on your thought about the story. If it fascinates you, do well to share it to others. Back to the story. The hotel had ceased to be a building. It was now a system quietly locking itself around Amara Chima. The moment Tae-Jin Kang decided she wasn't leaving, the corridors began to shift. Familiar hallways stretched unnaturally, and corners seemed to repeat, as if the space itself were correcting her path. The air grew heavy with a metallic undertone, the scent of polished steel and hidden machinery, and every step she took echoed with a clarity that felt like a report to a hidden listener. Amara kept walking, driven by the fear that stopping would be worse. Yet every door she passed felt subtly wrong, some ajar when they should be closed, others sealed with a finality she didn't remember. Behind her, she felt a heavy awareness. Tae-Jin wasn't rushing her. He didn't need to. His control wasn't a physical pursuit, but an environmental certainty. She reached the service hallway leading to staff exit A, her usual escape. She froze. Two men stood there in hotel uniforms that didn't match their rigid, predatory posture. Their eyes followed her without expression. They weren't staff. They were chess pieces placed to block a move she hadn't even made yet. "Excuse me, I need to pass," she whispered. Her voice felt swallowed by the corridor. One man tilted his head, not refusing, just waiting. That silence felt like a direct instruction from deeper within the hotel. Realization hit her like a physical blow. Every turn she'd taken had been a guided loop. She had never been walking freely. She turned and ran in the opposite direction, her shoes striking the floor with sharp urgency. The hotel responded instantly. The ceiling lights dimmed ahead of her, blurring the distance and making the path ahead uncertain. Then she saw him. Tae-Jin Kang stood at the far end of the corridor, still and exact. Retreat had been erased. The hallway behind her now felt miles long and empty. Tae-Jin raised his eyes, and the weight of his attention settled over her, precise and unavoidable. "You are moving in circles," he said calmly, his voice carrying perfectly as if the walls were designed to amplify him. "Because I have not allowed you to leave the one I chose." "I didn't do anything," Amara stammered, her chest tightening. Tae-Jin took a single step forward. The air seemed to compress between them. "You did," he replied. "You looked." From the shadows, more men appeared. They didn't surround her. They simply occupied the space where exits used to be. The perimeter was complete. Amara realized she wasn't being chased. She was being contained and observed. Tae-Jin's gaze never wavered. For the first time, she saw a flicker beneath his cold exterior. Interest sharpened into a lethal focus. She was an error in a system that didn't permit them. "Stay still," he said quietly. It wasn't a command. It was an inevitability. The word stay didn't land as a command. It landed like gravity. Amara Chima felt it settle into her bones as the corridor grew unnaturally still. The air shifted, smelling of rain that hadn't yet fallen and a cold, metallic scent like iron. Tae-Jin Kang stood at the end of the hallway, motionless, yet every part of Amara's awareness was pulled toward him as if distance had lost its meaning. Her body betrayed her, her pulse adjusting to his presence as if the environment had rewritten her internal rhythm. Above, the lights flickered, a controlled signal rather than a malfunction. In that brief flash, she saw the truth. The alignment of doors and the calculated positioning of men in the shadows weren't random. The entire structure had been reorganized around one person. Tae-Jin stepped into a pool of dim light. His shadow stretched unnaturally, and the space seemed to widen for him while narrowing for her. Amara curled her fingers into fists, grounding herself. "Why me?" she demanded, the question breaking through her fear. Tae-Jin watched her, deciding how much truth the room could survive. "Because you did not look away," he finally replied. The simplicity was more terrifying than a threat. It meant her choice had been observed and recorded. Amara stepped back, but two staff members emerged from a side door. Their movements were too synchronized for hospitality, their presence sealing the path behind her with quiet certainty. All exits were gone. Tae-Jin's attention sharpened, mapping her reactions like data. "You are not trapped," he said softly, then added the weight. "You are just not permitted to leave without understanding." A distant mechanical click echoed through the building's bones. Tae-Jin's gaze shifted, his stillness cracking into real-time calculation. "They are early," he murmured. Amara didn't know who they were, but she realized she was now a part of a system far larger than this hallway. Tae-Jin closed the distance, the air between them compressing until it felt thick and resistant. "Listen carefully," he said with lethal precision. "From this moment, you do not move alone inside this building. I am not your prisoner," Amara hissed, her resistance finally fracturing the fear. Tae-Jin stopped just inches away, the temperature shifting around him. "Not prisoner," he corrected, his voice almost intimate in its control. Variable. It was a cold reframing. She wasn't a guest or a captive. She was a classification. As the lights dimmed in a synchronized pulse across the floor, the building seemed to acknowledge a new directive. Amara understood the final, crushing truth. Tae-Jin Kang wasn't just watching her. He was integrating her into a design she could not yet see. The hotel had become a sealed world, its rules rewritten without notice. Amara Chima felt the change in the weighted air, as if every breath required invisible approval. Tae-Jin Kang stood nearby, no longer blocking her, yet making every direction feel equally controlled. Beyond the corridor, the building pulsed with a new, disciplined silence, the sound of coordinated movement. Amara realized she was no longer just confused. She was inside a structure. Tae-Jin's gaze flicked toward the hallway's end, listening to a frequency she couldn't hear. "Stay behind me," he said quietly. This wasn't a request, it was preparation. The temperature plummeted. 3 men in light-absorbing dark coats stepped into view. They didn't belong to the hotel system. They were noise, unregulated and predatory. They scanned the space like hunters confirming a kill. Tae-Jin's stillness was a warning. One of the newcomers spoke with edged arrogance. "We were told she's here." The word "she" reduced Amara to an object of retrieval. Tae-Jin stepped forward, the air seemingly obeying his motion. "Wrong building," he said. His tone wasn't a parley. It was a verdict. The lead hunter smiled thinly. Crimson doesn't make mistakes about assets. The word assets confirmed Amara's worst fear. She had been categorized by forces she didn't understand. The silence that followed was absolute until Tae-Jin moved. It wasn't a chaotic brawl, but a surgical correction. The air tightened as he entered their space. One man reached inside his coat and froze mid-motion, not stopped by a blow, but by the sheer enforcement of Tae-Jin's dominant environment. In seconds, the hunter's confidence dissolved into calculation. They backed away, understanding that retreat was a permission, not a right. When the silence returned, it was heavier, laden with proof. Amara's voice fractured as she asked, "What was that?" Tae-Jin turned, his expression bordering on irritation, not at her, but at the breach of his system. "A reminder," he said, "that your presence has been noticed beyond this building." A cold line formed down Amara's spine. The danger had expanded. Tae-Jin stepped closer, erasing the illusion of choice. "You do not leave," he said, "because leaving is now interpretation, and interpretation is what gets people killed." "I didn't ask for any of this," she resisted, though she knew the plea was irrelevant. Tae-Jin looked at her for a long moment. "Neither did I." For a single second, a flicker of human burden appeared beneath his mask before calculation reclaimed him. Overhead, the lights shifted subtly, a signal that the intrusion wasn't over. It was merely paused. The silence wasn't relief. It was the heavy pause between two irreversible decisions. The air grew saturated with the scent of rain and a metallic trace lingering beneath the sterile floors. Tae-Jin Kang stood closer now, his proximity shifting the atmosphere from one of protection to one of deep, systemic integration. The corridor lights dimmed, compressing the space as the building itself seemed to respond to his presence, acting as an extension of his authority. "They won't stop now," Tae-Jin said with cold certainty. "Because of what I saw?" Amara asked. Tae-Jin evaluated her, measuring her strength. "Because you exist within it now." It wasn't about an incident anymore. It was about an unwanted, unchosen inclusion. A subtle vibration pulsed through the floor. Amara stepped back instinctively, only to find herself closer to him, the space between them charged with a controlled heat. Tae-Jin reached into his coat and withdrew a small, dark device. Its matte surface pulsed with a slow, crimson glow. "What is that?" Amara whispered, afraid that a loud voice might activate the unknown. Tae-Jin watched the device, confirming a private truth before meeting her eyes. "This is where you stop being unseen." He stepped forward, final and controlled. Amara tensed as her back brushed the cold wall. She was trapped not by force, but by inevitability. Tae-Jin lifted the device. "Don't move," he said softly, not a command, but a necessity. Amara's body surrendered to the gravity of the moment. The device emitted a faint crimson pulse, reflecting off his pale skin and the tattoo on his neck. With surgical precision, he pressed it against the inside of her wrist. The contact was brief and electric, not painful, but invasive, as if she were being recognized from the inside out. The glow faded instantly. Amara pulled her hand back, staring at her skin. There was no mark, no sign, yet she felt fundamentally altered. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I made sure you don't disappear," he replied. It didn't sound like protection. It sounded like ownership. The corridor fell into an aware, responsive silence. Somewhere beyond the walls, the hotel's systems shifted, aligning with the change. Tae-Jin stepped back to observe her, and Amara finally accepted the truth. She was no longer just a witness inside the Crimson Empire. She had been marked. Whatever happened next, she could not walk away, because leaving was no longer a direction. It was a condition she no longer met. The building didn't just change, it exhaled. As the marks settled into Amara's skin, the lights faded into a synchronized, low glow, and the air sharpened with a metallic scent like blood and water. Tae-Jin Kang's gaze lifted, piercing through the structure toward a precise point of intrusion. "They're inside," he said. His calm made the words heavier. Amara felt a tingle in her wrist, no longer abstract but connected, as if the activation inside her had been pinged by something outside. Sharp, distant clicks echoed, reinforced doors cycling in rapid sequence. Coordinated footsteps followed, moving with a precision that mirrored Tae-Jin's. This wasn't an attack of brute force, it was one of insider knowledge. Tae-Jin stepped toward her with new intent. "Stay with me." Behind them, hidden panels slid open to reveal passages that shouldn't have existed. The environment was reshaping itself in real time. Tae-Jin gripped her wrist, firm and anchoring, and pulled her into motion. The buildings seemed to guide them, opening paths and sealing others as they plunged into a narrow, cold passage smelling of old concrete. "Someone inside my system is guiding them," he answered her unspoken question. It wasn't just a breach, it was a betrayal. They reached a junction where Amara saw shadows moving with eerie accuracy, fed by real-time data. A figure in a dark coat suddenly stepped into their path. There was no dialogue, only a sudden collapse of silence into force. Tae-Jin moved with surgical efficiency, a correction rather than a struggle. Within seconds, the path was clear, but the air remained charged with active conflict. Tae-Jin tightened his grip, pulling her closer. "They are not here for the building," he murmured. "They are here for you." The truth settled into her chest. She wasn't just a witness, she was the target. Every movement in the structure was now gravitating toward the mark on her wrist. They reached a final, heavily reinforced door. Tae-Jin placed his hand against it, and hidden mechanisms whirred to life. As the door slid open to reveal a darker, more controlled level of the facility, Tae-Jin hesitated for a fraction of a second. It wasn't uncertainty, it was a pivot in strategy. He looked at her, not as a variable or an observation, but as something that had shifted beyond his calculation. "This was not part of the plan," he said quietly. Then, as alarms began to wail deep within the structure, he added, "But neither are you." In that moment, Amara realized the most dangerous shift of all. Tae-Jin Kang had just abandoned his own design to protect her, changing the outcome of a war she was only beginning to understand. The deeper level of the structure felt less like a hotel and more like a tomb, cold, raw, and ancient. As the door sealed with a final click, Amara Chima knew the surface world had been severed. Here, the air was heavy with concrete dust and the scent of systems that never slept. Strips of sharp lighting revealed the stark hallways, but offered no warmth. Tae-Jin Kang released her wrist, but the absence of his grip didn't feel like freedom. It was the removal of a tether, leaving her to realize she had nowhere left to run. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice hushed by the weight of the silence. "This is where the surface ends," Tae-Jin replied. Amara's hand drifted to her wrist. The mark was invisible, yet she felt its quiet, internal pulse. "You marked me," she stated, the reality finally setting in. Tae-Jin didn't deflect. "I made you visible to the system." Frustration finally punctured her fear. "You didn't protect me," she challenged, her voice echoing against the concrete. "You made me part of this. You don't get to decide what I become." The silence that followed wasn't enforced, it was open. Tae-Jin watched her with a stillness that felt more like restraint than dominance. "You are already part of it," he said, his voice dropping its detachment. "The moment they entered this building for you, it stopped being your choice." Amara felt the suffocating truth of his words. Every exit was a loop. Every path led deeper. "Then why keep me alive?" she asked, the question raw and unfiltered. Tae-Jin hesitated. a fractional shift in his breathing that only someone as focused as Amara would notice. "Because you matter now," he said. The words weren't strategic. They were dangerously close to personal. Amara searched his expression, finding a focus so sharpened and unwavering it unsettled her more than any threat. "To whom?" Tae-Jin stepped closer. This time, the proximity didn't feel like containment. It felt like a deliberate choice. "To me," he said. The honesty carried more weight than any command. It stripped away the structure of the Crimson Empire and replaced it with something far more volatile: intention. A connection was forming inside the danger, and it didn't feel safe. It felt consuming. A distant, persistent alarm echoed through the facility, a reminder that their pause was fleeting. Tae-Jin's gaze remained locked on hers. In that moment, Amara understood the most terrifying truth of her new life. In a world built on absolute control, being hunted was a nightmare. But being chosen by the man who controlled the nightmare was a fate from which there was no return. The alarm didn't stop. It settled into a low, persistent pulse, the heartbeat of the structure itself. Amara Chima felt it vibrate through the concrete and into her chest, sinking with the unfamiliar awareness in her wrist. The facility seemed to narrow, pathways recalculating in real time as understanding finally began to displace her fear. Tae-Jin Kang moved toward a concealed panel. At his touch, it opened to reveal a hidden interface. Crimson light flickered across his skin, making the tattoo on his neck appear almost alive. Amara watched him, her mind sharpening. "The briefcase," she said, her voice steady. It wasn't just something valuable. Tae-Jin's fingers moved across the screen, dissolving layers of encrypted data. "No," he replied. "It was access." Amara stepped closer, drawn to the truth. "Access to what?" He turned, meeting her gaze fully. "To everything that keeps the Crimson Empire alive." The display shifted, revealing a massive, branching network. Nodes flickered in crimson, some stable, some dark. "This is the Crimson Ledger," Tae-Jin explained. "Not money, but people, movements, loyalties, and betrayals." Amara's mind raced as she processed the scale of the system. "And someone tried to steal it." "Not steal," Tae-Jin corrected. "Rewrite." The danger was clear. They wanted control over the system itself. The alarm reached its peak, and then, without warning, it stopped, not fading, not glitching, but cutting off completely, as if something inside the system had made a final decision. The silence that followed felt heavier than any noise before it. The air inside the underground structure shifted again, no longer vibrating with urgency, but settling into a dense, controlled stillness that pressed against the skin like invisible pressure. Amara Chima stood where she was, her breathing steady now, not because the danger had passed, but because she understood it, fully, completely. That understanding changed something inside her that could not be undone. The faint sensation in her wrist pulsed once, subtle but undeniable, a reminder she was no longer outside this world. Tae-Jin Kang did not move immediately. His gaze lifted slightly, as if listening to something beyond sound, beyond walls, something deeper within the Crimson system itself. Whatever he confirmed settled into his expression with finality. "It's done," he said quietly. The words carried resolution, not relief. Amara's eyes narrowed slightly, focused. "What is?" she asked, calm in a way that would have been impossible hours ago. "The breach," Tae-Jin said. "Whoever tried to rewrite the system has been cut out." She understood instantly. Cut out meant permanent removal. The system behind him dimmed slightly, crimson nodes stabilizing as order returned. "So it's over," she said. But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't. Tae-Jin stepped closer. His presence no longer felt like containment, but intention. "No," he said quietly. "It's not over." The air tightened. "Because you're still here." The meaning was clear. The system was restored, the threat removed, but she remained a variable. "Then let me leave," Amara said. Not a plea, a test. Silence stretched. Not uncertainty, but choice. For the first time, Tae-Jin did not respond with calculation. Something beneath his control shifted. "If you leave," he said finally, "you will be found." Not a threat. A fact. And if I stay? She asked. He stepped closer until the space between them no longer felt neutral. Then you live. Simple. Dangerous. Absolute. But something unspoken lingered beneath it now. You didn't have to mark me, she said quietly. Not accusation, acknowledgement. Yes, I did. Tae-Jin replied without hesitation. Amara studied him, not as the man controlling the system, but as the man who had altered it. Then I stay, she said. And everything shifted, not in the system, but between them. You understand what that means, he said. I do. He stepped closer again, until no distance remained. Then you don't stand behind me anymore, he said. You stand with me. The words settled like a permanent bond. Not because danger had ended, but because it had been accepted, reshaped, shared. Far above them, unseen, rain began to fall across the city. And in the silence that remained, Amara Chima understood the truth fully. She had not just survived the Crimson Empire. She had become part of it. And Tae-Jin Kang, the man who controlled it, had chosen not to let her go. What happens when the man she should fear the most becomes the only one she can't escape? And she had no idea that this was only the beginning. Amara Chima, a waitress, is forced into the Crimson Empire, a global shadow network built on invisible control. Given a choice between elimination or integration, she chooses partnership with its architect, Tae-Jin Kang, moving from captive to active stakeholder. Because in this world, real power isn't physical, it's control over hidden networks of loyalty and betrayal. Survival doesn't mean staying silent. It means evolving fast enough to become part of the system. To Amara, what looked like escape was just another layer of control she never saw coming. And to you, when there's no way out, do you fight the system or learn to survive inside it? If you want more, subscribe and follow Amara and Tae-Jin's descent into the Crimson Empire.